Whenever I hear somebody refer to something as a white whale, I always think about this episode of Seinfeld. Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to what is not necessarily a tag video, but a video in which I'm kind of responding to challenges put out there by another booktuber. That booktuber was Daniel over the channel Guilty Feet, and he came up with two videos in which he kind of laid out a challenge for other booktubers. One was to name your literary white whales, and I'll explain more about that in a minute. And the other was to discuss your relationship with perhaps an accidental author. And I'm going to talk about that second. So if you don't know, if you never visited Daniel's channel, please follow the link down below and check it out. He is unique and creative, and he reads a lot of great books, a wide variety of books, including comic books, as well as serious literary fiction. He reads all kinds of things, and his channel is just great. It has, generally speaking, the best opening, I think, in BookTube. But the first challenge he put out there that I want to talk about is to name your literary white whales. These are books which you haven't read, maybe feel like you should have read, and still intend to read. Now, he makes a really big point that these are not books that you have no intention of reading. And I'll link his video down below so you can see kind of what he's talking about. But these have to be books that you plan on reading, but for some reason you just haven't gotten to. So I want to talk about those books really quickly here and get your reaction to them. Maybe I should move them from the white whale, going to get them one day, kind of in a Captain Ahab way, going to get these books and take them down way. Maybe I should move them to a category of, don't bother. But my first book that I think is probably my biggest literary white whale right now is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. If you follow my channel, you may know that I occasionally badmouth John Steinbeck, and he is not my favorite American author. I don't, generally speaking, find his prose to be particularly great, and oftentimes I think his imagery, his symbolism is a bit heavy-handed. I do like some of his short works, Cannery Row, Tortilla Flat, even Of Mice and Men, I think are good books. But his longer books, particularly Grapes of Wrath, just never really worked for me. Not really books that I enjoy. And East of Eden is a long book. But I'm told by many people here on BookTube that East of Eden is a great book and I should read it. And I've been intending to do it and promising to do it for years, pretty much since I've been on BookTube, and outed myself as a non-John Steinbeck fan, and I still haven't gotten to it yet. So that's my first literary white whale. My second is probably the most obvious, and that essentially would be any of the long works by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Primarily, this would be the Brothers Karamazov. I've tried to read the Brothers Karamazov on 2 or 3 occasions, and I've never gotten more than 30 to 40 pages into it. There is, and I mentioned this in my unpopular opinions video, there is something heavy. There is something that's a weight, a feeling of responsibility, a feeling of this book has to have some kind of, as one commenter pointed out to me, some kind of a social conscience meaning, some kind of a point, some kind of a lesson to teach. And there's something about the way that works out for me in most Russian works that makes me not like them. Now, lots of people suggest other Russian authors, and I appreciate that. Gogol, Turgenev have been suggested. I'll try to read books by them as well, but Dostoevsky is the one who's most commonly talked about here on BookTube, and I just have never been able to get very far in the Brothers Karamazov. Now, I'm saying that is my white whale, that book. Many people have told me that's not the best place to start, perhaps with Dostoevsky's longer works, but I could just include almost any longer work by Dostoevsky as a white whale book for me. Book I intend to read, an author I intended to read, in long form, but just have never been able to kind of summon the intestinal fortitude to take it on. My third literary white whale is actually from an author who I've read one of their books and really liked, and that's Umberto Eco. I really liked The Name of the Rose, but I have tried to read Foucault's Pendulum, I think, on at least 4 different occasions. Most recently as a part of a read-along that Jason Harrigan hosted on his channel in one of its incarnations, and I just can't get into it. It is an intricate, kind of like a mystery thriller, psychological, symbolic story with all kind of historical arcana and touching on issues of occult knowledge, etc. And it seems like something I should be interested in. And on the surface it is, but every time I get into it, I get to a point where I just think, I'm not enjoying this the way I should. I think the last time I tried to read it, I was on about page 120 when I DNF'd it. So, you know, that is a book I want to read. It's a book I want to have read. It's a book I want to conquer. But I just haven't been able to get to it yet. So that would be Foucault's Pendulum by Umberto Eco. And the last book on the list is one where there's no, you know, excuse that the book is long, as I could say about the other three books, which are all long. And that is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. I've never read anything by Margaret Atwood, which I confessed to recently in a comment, I think, on another person's channel, and I have not read The Handmaid's Tale. I'm not sure that I have a good excuse for this other than, well, there are a couple of things I might say. Number one, I am one of those people who has a tendency to avoid books which I feel like receive a lot of hype. That's not really fair. It's a subconscious thing. I realize it's ridiculous, but I do that. And The Handmaid's Tale is definitely a book that's gotten, you know, a tremendous amount of hype. And then additionally, I do not care for dystopian fiction. It is, you know, every once in a while there's a tag that comes around and asks you what genre would you eliminate, and I should always say dystopian fiction because I just don't like it. And while I can appreciate the message and the underlying ideas of The Handmaid's Tale, which I know something about, I just can't bring myself to read it, or I haven't been able to bring myself to read it yet, but I do intend to do that. So there you go. Those are my 4 literary white whales. Let me know what you think about that. And now on to talking about my accidental author. So Daniel defined an accidental author as an author who you end up reading a lot of books by, even though you're not, you know, necessarily sure that you like their work, and you just seem to accumulate their books in some way and to read their books in some way. For me, that author is Julian Barnes. And I mentioned this in the comments on Daniel's video, which you can see here, but I want to run through how Julian Barnes became an accidental author for me. Okay, so I think I became aware of Julian Barnes as the author as a result of reading a piece in New Yorker, or reading an excerpt from Martin Amis's novel, The Information, in the New Yorker. Now, Martin Amis has recently died. I just did a video about the breakup of the friendship between Martin Amis and Julian Barnes, which was, fortunately, I think for both men, fixed. But I think in somehow reading that excerpt about The Information and reading about The Information, reading about some of the, you know, controversy surrounding Amis's actions, I think that's how I became aware of who Julian Barnes was. So I know I went to a bookstore, an old Borders bookstore, here near where I live, looking for a book by Julian Barnes without necessarily knowing which one I wanted to buy. And the first Julian Barnes book I bought was A History of the World in 10.5 chapters, a really irreverent and I think really well done kind of, you know, faux history of civilization and the world. And I really, really liked it. And so I thought, okay, well, Julian Barnes is going to be one of those authors for me. I bought a book of his short stories. You can notice that these books are similar in style, indicating how close together I bought them. I bought a book of his short stories called Cross Channel, which I really liked. I think most of the stories in the book deal with literally things on both sides of the English Channel in France and in England. Barnes spent a lot of time in France, in part because Barnes was researching and kind of obsessed with Gustave Flaubert, and then I read, after reading the stories in Cross Channel, I read his novel Flaubert's Parrot, which is kind of, again, kind of straddles that line between biography and fiction, and I really like this. So 3 books in a row I read by Barnes that I really, really liked, and I think it was right around that time that his new book came out. And that new book by Barnes that came out was England, England. Notice I have it in hardback. Okay, England, England came out by Barnes, and I read this, and I thought it was terrible. I thought this was just an awful, awful book. At the time, I didn't DNF books at all, so I read all the way through it. I think this was long-listed for the Booker. I have no idea why. I thought this was terrible, and so having read this and having, you know, paid for the hardback version of it, I was kind of off of Barnes, and I stopped reading them until his book Arthur and George came out, which is essentially kind of tells a fictionalized story of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's real involvement in a mystery involving, I believe, an Indian man who was accused of murder, and kind of their relationship and how that might have contributed to, or maybe it was after, been a reflection of Doyle's Sherlock Holmes stories. And I bought this book and I read it, and I liked it a lot. There was also, I believe, an adaptation, a BBC adaptation of this that was on, that aired, I don't know, 5, 6, 10, 15 years ago, something like this. But I read this and liked it, so I thought, okay, I'm back on to Julian Barnes. I'll read something else. It was around that time also that he published A Sense of an Ending, which I've never read, strangely, and also kind of a memoir, I think, kind of surrounding his mother's death, called Nothing to be Frightened of, with his ideas about death and essentially, why we shouldn't be frightened of death. I read that and I like this, so I was kind of, primed to read more Julian Barnes. For whatever reason, I never read A Sense of an Ending. You can see the part of the video I made about Margaret Atwood and why I never read Handmaid's Tale. A Sense of an Ending is probably Barnes's maybe best known book, most hyped book, most successful book, and maybe for that reason I didn't read it. And I went a long time without reading anything by Julian Barnes. But right around the time that I started my BookTube channel, Barnes came out with another novel called The Only Story, which I bought in hardback at the Brazos bookstore in Houston. You can see it says signed first edition. I assume there's a signature in here somewhere. Yes. It's one of those, I think, fake first, signed. But anyway, you know what I'm saying. I bought this, I read it, I reviewed it on my channel somewhere a long time ago, and I didn't really like it. And on top of that, I thought, I got a sneaking suspicion that lots of critics only read the first part of this and didn't have any idea what the book was actually about, because the criticism of the book or the reviews of the book didn't seem to in any way correspond with what I thought about the book. So I haven't bought any other Julian Barnes books, since then, and I haven't read anything else by Julian Barnes. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's 7 Julian Barnes books that I've owned and bought, just kind of accidentally, kind of blundering my way, through his work without necessarily really feeling like I was ever completely a fan. Oh, I miscounted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, that's 7 works. So he's my accidental author. If you want to do this challenge, go check out Daniel's originals. Like I said, I'll leave a link down below. He kind of gives you the guidelines for how to do it. And I just thought it was a really fun and kind of unique take on, BookTube challenges or, slightly tags. Anyway, there you go. Look forward to your comments in the comment section below. And as always, thank you for watching.